Okay, good to go, Chair.
Okay, thank you everyone, and to Cultra Rovalig and Shog with Cultra to the back strand, as Melissa I think had explained. A very important location, and members are very welcome. We do have a quorum, and I call the meeting to order and welcome all of you to the 47th meeting of the Committee for Communities. Can I remind anyone in the public gallery that mobile phones must be turned off. Mobile tablet devices can, however, be used through a Wi-Fi connection, which will be showing as UFTM_public, and all devices should be muted. No password is required, and no photographs or recordings may be taken. Can I remind members about the protocols regarding the use of electronic devices? Please switch all mobile devices to airplane mode and activate Wi-Fi connection. Please also use tablet devices discreetly and in a way that does not interfere with proceedings, and be aware of microphones throughout the meeting. So agenda item 1 then, members, declaration of interest for today. Do members have any interest they wish to declare? No, members content, thank you. Moving on then to agenda item 2, apologies. Clerk, can I check if we have any apologies?
We have apologies from Kelly Armstrong, Deputy Chair, and from Daniel McCrossen.
Yep, thank you. And that's, yep. Members aware of any other? I don't think there are any others to be aware of. Thank you. Okay, members then, Chair's business then. So firstly, members want to acknowledge the Minister's statement to the House on Monday, which contains some further details relating to the Department's spending plans for this financial year, and other items which I'm sure we will pick up on in terms of our scrutiny and advice role as we go forward. Following on from this, the committee will be briefed by the Minister at our meeting on the 3rd of July. In order for the Minister to ensure that correct information and is with the members are after, can I ask if members have any particular issues that they wish to have detail on? If you want to advise the clerk and team before close of play tomorrow, they can flag that to the Minister, and that information can be prepared in advance. As ever, members are free to raise any issues, but if there's particular items of detail that they're looking, it's usually helpful to do that. Okay, members, thank you. So moving on to draft minutes then, members, at agenda item 7. So the draft minutes from the meeting on the 29th of May are contained at page 7. Are members content to agree the minutes of 29th of May as drafted?
Agreed.
Yep, thank you. Matters arising, members, you've been provided with a summary table of matters arising at page 17. With regard to item 5.3, officials have offered to brief on a proposed tenancy fraud policy. Today's departmental briefing does not cover housing, so given work on developing the policy is ongoing, would members be content at this stage if we seek a written update at this point, and members can then ask officials who are in later if there's anything they can add at this stage, or if there's any correlation between those two strategies? Members content with that?
Yeah, content.
Yeah. And can I ask if members have any comments or issues then that you want to draw out or highlight or seek briefings for in relation to items 5.2 to 5.6, members? Go ahead, Sean.
This one's just from Kelly. It's on 5.3, the Financial Provisions Bill, the social housing tenancy fraud. She's just asking whether the Housing Executive provide an appeal process for the tenant, and can we ask the Housing Executive to provide a written briefing on the system, including the appeal system once it's agreed, and will there be a single contact number or email for the public or others to report tenancy fraud?
Yeah, members content. Okay, any other items within that block there, members? I suppose just the one is in relation to 5.5. I suppose it is an area of ongoing concern for us as a committee, and more generally around the amount of social homes, and I know there's an indication that may be increased, but I think it remains a job of work for the department to press hard to get the required level of homes built. I think that's an ongoing task for people. The other one that I wanted to flag was 5.6 there, in terms of the work around anti-poverty and the connection with councils. It might be worth at some point considering maybe getting Solace in to brief us on how they interact with the department in relation to some of those important strategies. So would members be content to replace them on our list of briefings at a future date?
Yeah.
Chair, can I just add that? Just one of the things that concerned me slightly was that in the budget, it sort of links to both 5.6. There's obviously no budget there for local councils to support the anti-poverty strategy, and I think that would be something to tease out in terms of our engagement with Solace, is how do they envision their role in connecting in with that, given that there's no budget currently for them to, supposed to add to any of the anti-poverty work that's currently ongoing at local government level.
Yeah, I think that'll be useful. Yes, Clerk.
And just a reminder, members, that we have, we're chasing up the councils that have not responded to our queries around their own strategies that they are holding, and I'm hoping that next week, but certainly the week after,
Great.
we'll be able to provide a memo just giving an update on the council's positions on that.
Yeah, it would be useful to find out how how they feed into a strategy and how a strategy might benefit councils, and I think it'll be a good connection to make with Solace in that regard.
Apologies, Chair, I have one more, sorry, on this. It's 5.4, the fuel poverty strategy. It's just wondering if we could potentially ask just when the mapping will be updated, given that the last one was done a considerable time ago, and will it be updated before any actions that have derived from the fuel poverty consultation are considered, so that we can have that baseline?
Yep, would members be content with that? Yep, thank you. Oh, excuse me. Members, moving on then to any comments or issues you want to draw out, highlight or seek briefings in relation to 5.7 to 5.13. Members. Yeah,
Sorry,
go ahead,
so
Sian.
sorry, it's another one from Kelly. It's just on 5.9 homelessness, and whether we can go back to the department to ask following the budget allocation. Many of the community and voluntary sector who delivered Supporting People in Complex Lives programme had raised the concerns with us that they just won't be able to meet the need. I'm just wondering, will the Minister be bidding for the additional revenue monies in June to add to Supporting People to ensure that need and resource costs can be met? I think if you remember, we had the briefing around wages, the uplift, overheads and things like that just not being met. I think it was at our meeting, was it maybe in Derry we were speaking to those workers, but it's just following on from that.
Okay, members content with that? In terms of 5.11 there, I note that the Minister says he will submit bids for the additional and recurring resources required, and this is in relation to the proposed changes to disability payments. So I find that a bit, I don't know where exactly the response is indicating that these resources are being bid from. It remains an ongoing, I believe, focus that, including, my understanding was from the Minister and the Department, that the British Government would reconsider the level of those cuts. So I think it might be useful to get a bit more clarity on, in terms of submitting bids, what the Minister means by that. If members are content? Mm-hmm. Okay. And just in light especially of how much impact that's having on the most vulnerable, or potentially will have on the most vulnerable people. So thank you,
Would
members.
it be worth your asking, sorry, whether Paddy Rooney or another Deputy Secretary would be able to give us an update on where we are with understanding the impact yet? In terms
the
of
impact,
the figures?
it remains very vague as to what the impact might be.
As I said, like last week, and I think actually maybe I asked this last week, but I think given that the Scottish committee were able to say how much would be reduced in their block grant, we don't have that information as yet. So I'm just wondering, I think last week we maybe committed to writing, but it's just really maybe to get an update on the figures and the kind of scope that the department are thinking that this will cause.
Go ahead.
Just to remind members, there is a informal briefing from the department around universal credit and so on. I think that official will be present, so that may be an opportune moment to ask further for some of those questions.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. But members content then with that? Thank you. So, anything else in 5.7 to 5.13, members? No. So there's nothing in table then in terms of matters arising. We're moving on to agenda item 6. Yeah. So I think we're moving on, members, then. Agenda item 6 is correspondence, and the memo is at page 114. So as usual, I consider items by number in a single group in this case, and ask viewers to draw out, highlight or seek briefings in relation to any specific item of correspondence. I note in 6.4 the only entries in the strategic investment report that are not flagged green relate to the Newry regeneration work. Would committee maybe seek further details in relation to what that is, how that's the case? Members content with that? Yeah. And at 6.5 then, there's a letter from Fermanagh and Omagh District Council seeking an opportunity for the Council to present the findings of the research relevant to the committee. Would members be content to seek a written submission in the first instance to see how that might impact and where we take it from there? Mm-hmm. Yep, thank you. So then, any other items then, 6.2 to 6.6? Correspondence items? Okay, and at 6.10 then, members, there's an invitation from the Human Rights Commission inviting members to the launch of its new independent research report, The Environment, Human Rights and the Windsor Framework. So I'm just flagging that to members. And then moving on to the items in 6.6 to 6.14. Are there issues there that members wish to flag up in correspondence? No, thank you. At 6.15 to 6.19 then, members, and at 6.23 in your table papers, there are emails received in relation to late funding to arts organisations. Are members content the committee sends copies of the emails to the department for comment and to include reference to these letters in our arts sector engagement report? The draft report will be brought back to the committee for final approval in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Sian?
Yeah, like how you immediately come to me. Sorry, I know I'm a beaten or a broken record on this. I believe that after the budget announcement or statement from the Minister in the Assembly Chamber on Tuesday, that a number of organisations did receive their letters then the day after. But it's just to reiterate, and I think this isn't just solely the arts either, just to reiterate, departments waiting to send out, and I know that hopefully the multi-year budget will help this. But it's no way to ask a sector to organise itself, to wait until the third month of the financial year, to be relying potentially on their own reserves to be able to plan, prepare and pay staff wages. It's not acceptable and it's not fair. You know,
no, it's absolutely it's one of those issues that should have been addressed long ago, but you certainly would hope that with multi-year budgets that there will be an improvement. But you do wonder because it's been such an issue, Maurice.
It's an important issue. How do we keep an eye on it to ensure that we can affect change?
Yeah. Should we seek information from the department in relation to why it continues to persist as an issue and how they foresee this now in light of potential multi-year budgets being managed to eliminate that problem?
I've engaged with Roisin McDonough, the chair or the CEO of the Arts Council, about this, and last year as well, because it is recurrent. So I definitely think that there could be something there. But I guess it's the nature at the minute of how budgets are formulated, that anytime I've asked the Minister, the department has come back to say they have to wait until their own allocations are confirmed. But, you know, I just think there has to be a better process. There has to be some aligning with financial years, whether that is a commitment prior to the budgets being set, I don't know, but I just think between our community and voluntary sector and the arm's length bodies, there needs to be a better mechanism for setting their budgets ahead of the finalised allocation. Otherwise you're going to have this every single year that we're coming to June, and these organisations with limited capacity, both financial and human, are having to go through this. So I don't know whether there's some kind of aligning of budgets or aligning of financial years, or maybe something from the department that gives an assurance to both the community and voluntary sector and to the arm's length bodies, who then feed on to other smaller organisations, that this will...
It may be one to raise with the Minister when he's in. Maybe that's one. Maybe to go ahead.
Chair, I was going to suggest that maybe we could, if members are agreed with a letter to that effect, that we would maybe include that when we send as a sort of the cover letter to the report, so that it goes together. If we're going to include that correspondence in with the report, would
members think
that work as a process?
Yeah, I think it'll draw attention to it. Go ahead, Brian.
And just in terms of those letters from the various groups, I think you said to send them to the department. If we send them to the Arts Council as well, just so that they're aware of it, because Arts Council is referred to in the letters.
Yeah. Members agreed?
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you all. So members, then at 6.20 there's correspondence from an individual relating to the sign language bill. Are we content that the committee seeks this individual's agreement for the correspondence to be accepted as evidence for the committee? We can invite the individual to the upcoming informal evidence gathering session as well, which is provisionally scheduled for Monday 23rd of June. And also to note that there has been a fairly extensive engagement process taking place on the evidence session. So there's a number of avenues there. So would members be content to proceed on that in that way?
Yeah.
Great.
Thank you. And finally, members, any comments on item 6.21? Are you content?
Scrolled it out by mistake.
Yes, okay. Yeah. Okay, so members, then items 6.24 to 6.2.
Sorry,
Yep.
Chair. No, 6.21. I think it's an interesting letter from the or the Assembly Executive Review Committee. And it's a concern that we've raised before, that when we get cross-cutting strategies, and the Department for Communities quite often takes the lead in a number of these, but they're meant to apply to all departments, and then knowing will they all follow up on actions. And we hear also motions, there was one in the Assembly this week, referring back to the High Street Task Force report and questioning whether departments had followed up on their actions. No, I think we should. I know I think the deadline is September. So whether we as a committee submit a report, I think we should do. If we take time to consider that, we have a bit of time to do that. But because it is a problem that a certain department takes the lead on a strategy, all departments are meant to buy into it. But who follows up on that? Yeah. I'm not proposing we set up more bodies, more committees. But through cross-departmental structures, there should be that follow-up. And there probably is the need to have a department allocated to chase up, whether that's the Executive Office or Department for Communities, whoever took the lead in the first place.
Yeah, and I think we certainly should be reflecting the concern that, because the anti-poverty strategy, for example, has other departments involved, and it is important. And I'll declare that I'm a member of the PAC, but the report from the PAC into the children's poverty strategy indicated that lack of governance and accountability is something that can impact on the strategy. So I think it is something we have a particular interest in. Yeah. Clerk?
Yes, Chair. My suggestion here is that I'll speak to the clerk, AERC, and just get sort of further details on if there's any other timelines rather than just the final deadline. And then if the committee is content, officials will look at drafting some sort of a response for the summer, and then bring it back to the committee at the first meeting in September, which will then give us give the committee time to consider response and amend it and so on before the deadline at the end of the month. Would that work? Yeah.
I'm just mindful how often people talk about reports sitting on shelves, what comes out of strategies, that we need to ensure that there is ownership of the actions, and follow up.
Yeah, no, I think it's important. Members content with the proposal as put forward there by the clerk? Thank you. Okay then, so item 6.24 to 6.25, just checking members, anything in correspondence out any members wish to draw out? No. Okay, thank you members. So then we will move on to our first briefing this morning, and our first briefing then is by the National Museums NI. Papers for the agenda items start at page 305, and I'd now like to welcome the following representatives to the meeting. So we have Ms. Kathryn Thomson, and Kathryn is the Chief Executive, William Blair, who's Director of Collections, and Aaron Ward, who's Director of Public Engagement. So you're all very welcome to Cultra, and thank you for hosting us this morning in this wonderful venue. And Kathryn, could maybe I invite you to make a brief opening statement? I think it's yourself, and then we'll come to questions from members.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. And you're welcome to the Cultra Manor, which is on our Cultra estate. We have two museums here, the Ulster Folk Museum at this side of the road and the Ulster Transport Museum at the other side of the road, and we're absolutely delighted to be able to have you with us today and the opportunity to chat to you about our work. So I was just going to, we circulated in advance our brand new corporate strategy, which covers the period 2025 to 2030, and we also circulated our annual review from last year, or from the last full year that we have published, to give you a flavour of more of our work. But I just wanted to maybe focus on our corporate strategy and give you a few comments and a bit more detail around it. We launched this corporate strategy in April this year, and the Minister supported us in that launch, and we did it following a period of public consultation. It's the first time we've run a full public consultation on our strategy, and we were really encouraged by the feedback that we got from that process. This strategy very much builds on our previous strategies. It's an evolution of our work, and within it we outline and really focus on the impact and the difference that we make as an organisation. So it's not trying to talk to functionally what we do, but very much focus on the impact that we make and the difference that we can play and the role that we can play within society. We have outlined 4 impact areas in our strategy, and we very purposefully aligned them to the 4 missions within the Programme for Government, the missions of people, peace, planet and prosperity. And I think that demonstrates the cross-cutting nature of our work. Like all culture, heritage and arts bodies, we would argue that our work actually cuts across government. We very comfortably and very happily sit within the Department for Communities, but we deliver outcomes for DERA, for education, for the economy and for health, and I think that's very important context. We have a really short video that summarises and gives you a flavour of our work, which we thought we might play for you. I know that you've all got the presentations on your, but just so that we're all watching it at the same time, I think it's probably easier. So if you want to maybe press play.
National Museums NI. Our museums are well known for being very special places, whether it's for their treasures and their timelessness, their connection with traditions and identities that make us who we are, their storytelling ability, conveying the experience of generations of emigrants, or their celebration of the innovation that made us world leaders in industry. They are loved and cherished by the people of this region and beyond. What's more, our museums are worth their weight in whatever precious commodity you want to use as your measure: economic impact, educational benefit, individual and community well-being, environmental sustainability, the list goes on. But we are all adapting to a fast-changing world, and our museums must adapt too, because they aren't just static monuments to the past. They are dynamic institutions, addressing the pressing issues of our time. Society is becoming ever more diverse, and with that comes a need for more understanding of different cultures and identities, and a greater need for mutual understanding and respect. Our museums are places where the richness and diversity of individual and community identities, both local and global, can be shared and explored. We are enjoying the benefits of our hard-won peace process and stand as an international exemplar in conflict resolution. But building lasting peace is a journey that requires ongoing commitment. Museums are shared, safe spaces for conversations, debate and dialogue as we continue to build a shared and prosperous future for all. We believe that the most urgent issue we face is the environmental crisis that increasingly looms large in everyone's lives. Climate change, biodiversity loss, pollution and habitat destruction all pose serious threats to our planet. Museums can be platforms for environmental advocacy, using their collections as a resource for research, education and action. We know that the foundation of hope for the future is the next generation, whom we must inspire with new ideas, new thinking and creativity. Museums are an incubator for young and inquisitive minds. This is where new generations can begin their journeys in science, technology and the arts. So we must ask ourselves, how can our museums be a force for good in the face of so many changes that appear to threaten peace, prosperity and even the planet itself? In answer, we believe that our museums must be a dynamic forum for open-minded and innovative discussion, a confident voice for inclusion, diversity, reconciliation and sustainability, and a powerful canvas for positive change in society. This is our chance to truly be here for good.
Thank you. So I was just maybe going to make a couple of comments on each of those kind of 4 impact areas, and then we'll just open up for any comments. So our first impact area that we have defined is identity, and it very much is about recognising that we live in an increasingly diverse society, and we want everybody who comes into the museum to feel welcome and to be able to explore those different perspectives on life. And we have a couple of initiatives we work with: our Inclusive Global Histories. We work with our World Cultures collection at the Ulster Museum, and it has allowed us to build both international relations as well as new relationships with newcomer communities locally here in Northern Ireland. And it's really helped us to diversify our audience and bring people into the museum who perhaps hadn't recognised themselves there before, but also helped us to work to build empathy and respect between different communities. We have here at the Ulster Folk Museum our Languages of Ulster programme, and over the last number of years we've developed both an Ulster Scots and an Irish language trail, 2 trails here at the Ulster Folk Museum, which draws on our very rich linguistic archives that we have here. And that helps us really to discuss the role of language in communities and how it's helped to build and shape communities. Our second area of impact is peace building, and that's very much aligned to the peace mission within the Programme for Government, and we think our work can support good relations, community cohesion and equality. And that work very much builds out of our Troubles and Beyond gallery and programme at the Ulster Museum. We talk in the gallery about the fact that we have a shared history, but we don't have a shared memory or lived experience, and so therefore we want to provide a space where we can bring the multiple perspectives on our past together and help people who come into the gallery to challenge their own perceptions, to build understanding and to help to work together to build and shape a better future. Very much I think we can support the social peace process here in Northern Ireland. Our third impact area on the environment is very much aligned to the planet mission within the Programme for Government, and we think our work can help support climate change and environmental education. We have our natural science collection that we hold at the Ulster Museum. It is really the big data that tracks decades of environmental change and biodiversity. And we also have at both of our outdoor sites, the Folk Museum and the Transport Museum, the Folk Museum and the Ulster American Folk Park, we have very unique landscapes. This is a very unique biodiversity that we have here. And we have built partnerships on this site. We have the conservation volunteers here with us now, and also we've been partnering with the Woodlands Trust. So as you drove up the road today, you probably will have seen the fact that we have cleared all of the invasive species from this site. As you drive out, if you didn't see them on the way in, we've got incredible foxgloves that have are sprung up, meadows of them down the bottom of the hill, and it's really helping us to bring species and pollinators back onto the site. And through all of those, our natural science collection and our landscapes are really able to help educate our visitors on action that they can take to protect the environment, but also how they can live more sustainably. Our final impact area then is innovation, which is very much aligned to the prosperity mission within the Programme for Government, and our work can support skills development, employability and regional balance through tourism. And I think particularly by supporting STEAM learning, we can help to inspire the next generation of innovators and entrepreneurs, as well as develop those creativity skills within our young people. The final thing I just wanted to say was, as well as all of that work, we also are very focused on the future, and we have huge ambitions to deliver £70 million worth of capital investment in our infrastructure over the next 5 years. We have 2 big projects. One of those projects is at the Ulster American Folk Park. We have a £22 million capital investment programme there. That project is part of the Mid-South West Growth Deal that's been led by the 3 councils in that part of in that region, and it will very much focus on us strengthening the arrival, the transition through the ship gallery, and also the exit from the park. We're really excited about that project, and we are beginning our design phase for that and our concept phase, and we want to really use that as an opportunity to develop the narrative at the park and to tell stories that we haven't told there before. And the other project that we're really excited about is our Reawakening the Ulster Folk Museum project. It's a £50 million project here at the Ulster Folk Museum. We have full planning approval for that. We've done our design development work, and our ambition is to take that from being what it is now, a very good but static, one-dimensional living history museum, and we want to develop it to be a multi-layered environment and heritage resource. And I know that after your meeting today, we're going to get the opportunity to take you into the museum and to talk to you a bit more about that project. But that's all I'll say at this stage, and we're really happy to take any questions that any of the committee have today.
Okay, well listen, thank you very much. And I have to say, I thought the video was excellent. In a very short space of time, I was struck by how many of the images, and I think I've seen Clunty Clay School in there for my constituency. I've seen the Ulster Folk Park in there, obviously, but even iconography of the conflict here. And so I was struck by how many images I recognised, and it gave an almost instant connection. So it's really strong in that sense, and it underlines the importance of museums generally to all of us. And I suppose I'm conscious that the Minister in a statement on Monday talked about year-on-year budget cuts placing increasing pressure on the museums and threatening your ability to serve the public effectively, I think was the words that the Minister used. So can you explain to the committee how these pressures manifest themselves and any specific effects that they have had on your operations? Yeah.
So we're not unlike any other public body, and we face an extremely challenging financial environment. We have, I think, received a fair budget settlement this year, and we're very grateful to the Minister. It doesn't mean that it's not challenging for us. It is very challenging, but I think we have to be realistic about the environment that we're working in and that we're competing within. And we feel that we always feel that with more money we could do so much more, but we think that with what we get, we punch as hard as we can above our weight. Over the last, I've been in my role 9 years, we've done a huge amount during that time to drive transformation throughout the organisation, to ensure that we are fit for purpose as we can be, to make sure that we are efficient and effective in everything that we do, but also that we're always focused on what we can do to serve our community. So the budget position is challenging, but we feel that we have a fair settlement, and we will do our best to work within that this year.
Thank you. The other thing that the video talked about was sharing, which struck me, and it actually occurred to me. I was brought up in a family of 10, and the concept of sharing very often became ownership in a family that size, or even borrowing. So, and I know you've mentioned the fact that you possess 1.4 million artefacts now, and I do want to acknowledge the repatriation of human remains. I think that was a really good step, and also I believe that the museum are taking a proactive look at how other elements can be repatriated, and the decolonisation of some collections, which is a problem that affects beyond here. So I welcome all of that. The Assembly obviously also in recent couple of weeks passed a motion in relation to that. But in terms of those 1.4 million artefacts, would you have any idea of what percentage of those may come into the scope of where they were borrowed or came from other places who may wish to see them returned?
Well, we do. The collection, the numbers are really made up, and much of what we hold are research collections. I spend my kind of life almost trying to explain how what that 1.4 million means. But if you take something like, for example, natural sciences that Kathryn referred to, much of that is actually their research collections. It's kind of geology and specimens, marine biology, entomology, etc., etc. So they're really kind of research collections. Like the Harland Wolff ship plan collection, which is also held here again, is a very, very big collection, but it's essentially a big archive. So in terms of actually, you would say maybe the most sensitive part of the collection in terms of the global aspect of this, it's what we term our World Cultures collection, which is actually less than 1%. It's about 4,000 objects in total. But but it's obviously it's an important collection, and that's where some of those issues kind of tend to revolve around. But I think sometimes decolonisation is a term that can often be kind of misunderstood in a way. It's we framed our work as inclusive global histories, and actually the work we've done has been very positive. We found the whole process actually to be very a very positive experience, because a lot of it is about building new partnerships and building new relationships. And, that can be research partnerships, it can be, but particularly relationships, new partnerships with people in society currently, particularly, say, ethnic minority communities. And really understanding that collection, repatriation is part of it, and obviously we're very, if we get a request, we're very kind of, we'll deal with it according to our policy, and we've demonstrated that we will take the necessary steps. But for many people, for example, we might have 500 items, for example, that have an African kind of history, but actually we have many people in the society now who actually have African heritage. So what we do with that collection is as much about how we work with people here and now in society in terms of understanding how we interpret it, how we kind of present it. It's not simply they would have a view in terms of actually what we do with it. So as I say, it's really what drives that work ultimately is collaboration and partnership. And that's really, as I say, we found it to be very positive. Where we have kind of, like with the Hawaiian, that was a very kind of clear-cut issue really for us. We don't want to be holding in our collection kind of sacred objects, human remains that actually are, were collected under very dubious kind of circumstances over 150 years ago. So we'll always do the right thing when we kind of get a request of that nature. But actually, inclusive global histories is essentially about working with communities here today and building that better understanding, that shared understanding through, as I say, partnership working.
Okay, thank you. And the other final one for me before I go to members then is in relation to the outreach, and it was very strong in the video there as well. So in terms of your outreach, how do you engage with schools, and is it all a question of them coming to you? And I know many of the schools do visits and all that, but do you do engagements the other ways in terms of outreach, or can you tell us anything more about that?
We have our on-site schools programme that we've always run, but during COVID we developed what we call our Museum on the Move programme, because we weren't able to open the museums during that period. We developed a virtual programme, so we sent loan boxes out to schools, and then our team at the museum were broadcast live into the classroom to run this, so they've got handling objects in the classroom and we're able to be there. That programme proved to be massively successful, particularly in terms of our reach into areas that we haven't worked with before, particularly rural areas and areas that are further away from the museum. The challenge for a lot of schools coming to the museum is the cost of the transport. It's not the actual visit. And also it gave us a very strong reach into areas of social exclusion. So we were delighted with the success of that programme and how it introduced people to the museum that we hadn't worked with before. So our challenge coming out of COVID has been to to manage our on-site programme, but also to retain our Museum on the Move programme. And we've, thankfully, our team, who work exceptionally hard, have been able to do that, because that has been really important to us in terms of relationships and also creating a bridge into the museum. So for those who hadn't engaged with us previously, they now, we hope, will have the confidence to bring their schools into the museum in terms of what they can do.
Just to add, we engage with about 50,000 school children per year. And it's really interesting when you dot that on a map. It is fully regional spread across the whole of Ulster, really, all 9 counties and across Northern Ireland. So it is a really important programme for us that we run, and a really important part of our remit.
And it's actually been part of our transformation programme. We've kind of rebuilt our education department in a sense, and it's very strong in delivering kind of important results for us.
Okay, thank you, my Shiv. That's very positive. Brian.
Okay, thank you, Chair. And you've already covered some of the questions I wanted to ask, but thank you for your presentation and the information. and it's a pleasure to visit the Cultra Manor today. Certainly, I mean, museums are very important to any society, to any country, to capture history and promote awareness. And I'm impressed by what you've said today about also having a broader view and the outreach that you do to schools. I was going to ask about that. To start with our own history, and there are various venues. You mentioned there's different. I think the way you put it is not a shared memory and not a shared lived experience, even though we have a shared history. And there are venues where you can go and see a particular slant on history, but obviously you have a particular responsibility to both have a broad version of history and a sort of balanced version, and so that people can see, well, at least I can see a narrative within there that I recognise, but there's also other narratives. Can you say a bit more about how you handle our own history, the Troubles and beyond?
I leave it to William because it's a specialist subject.
Well, no pressure then.
Mastermind, put him on the spot there. Quick fire.
But it's it is a challenging area for reasons you'll all appreciate, because it's very this is our recent history is very much part of it's very live in a sense, and our approach really in terms of actually our programme is called The Troubles and Beyond, and it centres on particularly the work at the Ulster Museum and the exhibition there, which attracts over 200,000 visitors a year. It's probably our most visited gallery actually. But what we've done we also take the view that really this is our recent history. Nobody owns it. It's a distributed story, and many organisations have a role to play in terms of how we understand it, and how we move forward in terms of from a peace building perspective. We've been involved in a new initiative, well, it's relatively new, called the Conflict and Legacy Interpretive Network, and it's ourselves working with the Museum of Free Derry, Bloody Sunday Trust and Healing Through Remembering, are the sort of the management group. But that brings together a very diverse range of organisations, within that network. To name a few of them, for example, close to here you'd have Decorum NI in Bangor that works with people who would have been served under Operation Banner. Mm-hmm. You have the Police Museum, you have the James Connolly Centre, you have the Roddy McCorley Republican Heritage Centre, you have, as well as the Museum of Free Derry, you have the Siege Museum in that city. And, so it's actually, you have Linen Hall Library, you have like the National Museum of Ireland are also, so it's a very diverse group of organisations who are actually come together and to work on areas of common interest. And we've been successful actually, but hasn't been publicly announced yet. So
You're on public record, but yes.
I'm on public record. But we have put it this way: we have an application with the Heritage Fund, and we've had some good news recently in that regard. So, and I think that is a recognition on the part of the Heritage Fund of the importance of an initiative like the Conflict Legacy Interpretive Network. And I think that the important thing is that when we consider, our recent history and the troubles or the recent conflict and its legacy, and how we the key again is collaboration. It's about working together. It's about listening very carefully to the stories that people want to tell, and to bring as much sensitivity to that process as possible. Mm-hmm. But we feel it's important work, and as I say, it's like all the important work we do is very much driven by collaboration and partnership.
Okay, well, that's very interesting.
I would just maybe add to that, because William said it is a distributed story, but often at a community level it's a single identity story, and I suppose what we do at the Ulster Museum is we can bring all of those together, and those multiple perspectives can sit together, and therefore people can come in and start to understand the complexity.
Like we would see that as being in many ways the distinctive contribution that the Ulster Museum can play, you know, because we collect right across the whole spectrum. And I feel, you know, in the last 10 years in particular, you know, our collection now is, you know, we have such an important collection and so diverse and so multifaceted, you know, but actually, you know, the Ulster Museum exhibition, and also the fact that then it sits within a suite of history galleries where you have this broader context as well, you know, that, you know, it includes kind of in the modern history gallery, the period around the, so, you know, decade of centenaries, et cetera, that you can actually trace some of the themes, some of the kind of issues across a much wider time frame. So the Ulster Museum, you know, does, I think, have an important role to play, you know, in terms of that process of actually making sense of who we are and where we're going.
What was that called? The Conflict and Troubles Heritage Network? No,
it's the Conflict and
Legacy
Legacy Interpretive Network. And if you type it in, there's a website, and you'll see there just kind of some of the collaborative work that's, there was a digital exhibition, for example. It lists all the members. And in many respects, it is remarkable when you see the diversity of the membership.
Okay.
You know, I think it's very positive.
Okay, no, that's important. And it's the Ulster Museum in particular, I think, that convenes that. Is that what you're saying, or plays a leading role in it?
Well, it's the management group is ourselves with the Museum of Free Dairy and Healing Through Remembering are the sort of management group currently. But you know, so we're certainly kind of, it's a priority for us, and you know, we really value the relationships that we have through that network, and it's wonderful to be able to work with that range of organisations across that broad spectrum.
Yeah, no, it is interesting, and I mean, there's a place for single identity work, but there's always a danger people just become comfortable in a certain version of history. So at least you're trying to broaden that out. The chair's already covered about reach. I wanted to ask about the other one I want to ask about is you referred to trying the diverse society, inclusive global histories. We did have that debate in the assembly about so-called decolonialisation. I'm not comfortable with the term, you know, but I understand the issues, you know, and you have to look where there's requests for items to be returned, and if there's particular sensitivity around that. There's also items which were legitimately received and obtained, and yeah, it's important that we're not just a local museum, that people can also learn about the wider world, and people coming from other parts of the world can see aspects of their culture there. So, as I say, I think there is a place to go. I mean, as a child I was always fascinated by the mummy, you know, in the Ulster Museum, and other aspects of world culture that you're learning about. So you very much, I think from what you're saying, you see an ongoing role for wider world culture to be on display?
Absolutely. I think sometimes, like, decolonisation is it's a sectoral term, you know, it's not one that we invented, it's a sectoral kind of term. You know, as I say, we framed our work kind of around the concept of inclusive global histories, because I think it just more makes more sense in some ways, you know, in terms of like the kind of work that we do. But our world cultures collection is growing. It's not kind of reducing, but it's growing because of the partnerships and the collaborations, you know, that we have developed, because it's important that people feel represented within our museums and can see themselves represented and see their traditions, see the things that are important to them represented in the museums, and that's why, because we've built these better partnerships right across kind of a whole range of different issues, you know, that's the collection is actually growing, you know, as a result of that. But it's just growing in a different way. You know, it's not kind of you know, people are donating material that actually helps us to then, you know, tell the story, whether it's kind of, you know, people with a kind of from the Indian community or the Chinese community or whatever, you know, but actually just wanting to feel that their story is more fully represented. And, you know, so it's actually been, as I say, a very kind of positive kind of program for us, you know, because it has been about building better relationships. And we see it as always going to be an important part, you know, because I think the relationship, you know, the relationship between local and global is one that I think particularly with, well, it actually kind of informs, it impacts on all of the museums, because if you take somebody like Harry Ferguson, like he's kind of local man in a sense, but had a global impact. So I think that kind of having international horizons is really important to everything that we do.
I would say, sorry, just 2 seconds. Our work in Inclusive Global Histories isn't exclusive to the Ulster Museum. The principles we are applying across our other museums. So, for example, at the Ulster American Folk Park, we're looking to develop the narrative there and use our principles to tell the stories of enslaved people, which we haven't historically covered at the park there. So we're looking at how those principles apply across the totality of our work.
Okay. And it's not to the exclusion of the stories that we traditionally tell. You know, like the melon story, for example, is a really key story that we're still developing.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I fully agree with our need to be global in terms of how we look out, and also with how we welcome people who live here. All of that's relevant. I suppose to go back to my original analogy around, it depends on how it came by, and it also depends then, regardless of that, if the person who owns it or feels ownership of it looks it back. So what might or seeks it back, and in our house that often was the person who owned it had to get it back. You could maybe borrow it another while longer, but you had to have an agreement that it was going back. But it might be useful, you'd reference the artefacts return policy, maybe if you could send that to us, we could get a look at that. But I totally accept that that's an ongoing work, and I know this is a more global even movement around what belongs where and how it's shared with people and how it's recorded and preserved, and all of those things are hugely important. So maybe if we get the policy, that will be helpful for that.
And there's information on our website, you know, because I think the key with this is just being really transparent, so that actually kind of it's all there, you know. And if you go to our website, if you Google, you know, so we'll send the happily shared policy, but also I think it's the relevant links as well, you know, so that you can see, you know, kind of how we describe it, how we talk about it, and that we're very clear in terms of if anyone has an issue or wants to bring any kind of, you know, that it's very clear how you do that and what the process is.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sean.
Right, and thank you very much. Lovely to see you again, William and Kathryn, and nice to meet you. I'm really interested just in terms of the redevelopment and the proposed changes. I know that the turnover that you brought in was 4.3 million last year, or in your last record. Do you envision that the 50 million that you would bring in to here, the 22 million down in Oma, do you think that will bring more into in
people or money?
Both.
Okay. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, it's intended to bring more people, which has an important outcome of bringing more money, because it's important that we are financially resilient as an organisation. I think it would be hard to imagine the stage where we don't receive a subvention from government as well, because we do perform a public service, but it is important at the same time that we have ability to generate our own income to support our work as well. But the goal really of both projects is about reinvestment and renewal. I think Ulster Folk Museum and Ulster American Folk Park, they haven't received major investment in quite some time. And as things change with people have more things to do with their time, more options, there's a risk that with that lack of investment in renewal, that they keep getting, their facilities get older, they become less relevant, and then that's where you see a decline in visitor numbers. So we want to renew those museums, invest in new facilities, invest in new programming, invest in new things to do, so that they remain relevant as much as anything else. And that increase in people almost is an impact of them being relevant, them being appealing and compelling as an offer for people. Therefore, we see more people coming in, and it has a helpful secondary then impact of bringing in more money. So it's more about relevance than income generation, really, but not that the income generation isn't an important part of the mix.
Because in the document we received, the capital funds that you received, it's 1.1 million for such a large estate. That seems quite small, and I'm just wondering what pressure that's put on the organisation as a whole and across the sites. And I suppose when the last time, like obviously the upkeep of somewhere like this, the upkeep of both the Folk and Transport Museum and across the road. I'm just wondering, how do you manage that? How do you upkeep with such a small capital investment?
So last year for us was particularly challenging. Historically, in previous years, it's been reducing our capital allocation over a number of years, and last year was particularly challenging. But this year, in the budget the Minister announced this week, we have £3 million for capital, and that will allow us to do more emergency and remedial works and conservation works, particularly to our exhibit buildings. So the challenge for us with our capital allocation is we have to maintain all our exhibit buildings as well as our wider estate. And so with £3 million, we will have we will be able to address some of our more immediate concerns. But I think longer term, we do need a multi-year budget will be very welcome for us, because the spending capital is very challenging on an annual basis, and we also have to rely on CPD to support us in delivering that capital spend. They have their own issues and their own pressures, and sometimes it's not because we can't spend the money, but it's because we can't get the resources we need from CPD to support us in delivering that. But we work very closely with them, we have a very positive relationship with them, and we do our best to try and deliver with what we have. But I think in an ideal world, we would need a larger recurring capital budget to just maintain our estate, because as the estate deteriorates, then in the longer term it costs actually more to maintain it.
The other thing that something I think is a huge positive of Ulster Museum, National Museums, is it's the access. So the access to those who wouldn't naturally be able to go to a museum, so the likes of the Ulster Museum being free, I think is such a wonderful thing, and it is such an incredible resource, particularly for families. In terms of your data collection, is that something? Can you see any, I suppose, any further engagement with that level of collecting that data in terms of background, social, socioeconomic backgrounds, things like that, I suppose, to paint the impact of where your reach is?
We have a quarterly exit survey, and that collects data across lots of socio-demographic characteristics, where they're from, the age, religious affiliation, all sorts of things that gives us a good way of measuring that equality that we reach. I think it's very difficult for any organisation, including museums, to achieve a point where you're fully representative of the population across all of those characteristics, but it is something that we monitor on a quarterly basis, and where there are any significant gaps, then that impacts on our programming or our engagement approach to try and close those gaps as best as possible. So it's very much an ongoing process.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks, Sean. Morris, going down the rail.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you very much for your presentation. I found it very interesting. I like the concept that developed over COVID of expanding the museum service out in an educational sense. But have you any plans to evolve that even further for collaboration with local councils? Maybe put on mobile exhibitions in town halls or sports halls or whatever. Have you any plans to sort of evolve that? I think it's a brilliant idea to get your message out and get the artefacts out, get everything seen.
I mean, we already have loans out across many different places, across not just Northern Ireland, but more broadly, in fact, even globally. But do you want to say a bit more about that?
Well, we have a good relationship with the Northern Ireland Museums Council, which is the body that is responsible for kind of supporting the development of local museums and local and those attached to local councils. We're very proactive in terms of our loans, and I would say kind of we stand very favourably in comparison to any national museum in terms of the number of loans and the type of loans that we enable, because we feel it's, particularly here, it's quite a small place. You do have to be very responsive, really, to do everything you can to facilitate access. Some of the big programs, like one of the major programs around our inclusive global histories kind of work, was actually a partnership with local museums, and it involved a number kind of across kind of Northern Ireland, and it was supported by the Esme Fairbairn Collections Fund through the Museums Association, and we have a history of kind of where there's been important programs where we've approached them in partnership with local museums. We certainly do that. We're always open to those kind of opportunities because it works both ways. You know, it's kind of, it gives us kind of in some ways more of a local foothold sometimes, you know, in terms of local areas. But it's also part of our role, kind of in a sense, given the collection that we have and given our remit, you know, is to be supportive.
Thank you very much. One more question,
Yeah.
and I'll be brief. Minister Lyons has established a special status for Northern Ireland coming into next year's 250th anniversary, July the 4th, 2026. How have you been involved in that there? And I know it's of particular interest, I think, from the American Folk Park point of view, and you did say there that it does need some sort of renewal. So how is that factored in to help celebrate the 250th anniversary, considering Northern Ireland, Ulster, Ireland's contribution to the establishment of America and the involvement of America and the many presidents, etc. I mean, the list of people who have influenced America from this wee country is endless.
We're really excited about the opportunity of America 250 because we say at the Ulster American Folk Park we do Ulster American links every single day, 365 days a year. It's kind of the whole essence of our story and what we do there, and we talk about it over the last 250 years and how immigration has developed those links and the impact that we've had and globally. So I think next year for us is a real opportunity to shine a spotlight on the Ulster American Folk Park. It's a real opportunity for us to celebrate the annual programme of events that we have from Bluegrass, which was our Bluegrass Festival, which was a couple of weeks ago, through the 4th of July celebrations, Halloween, because obviously we gave America Halloween from this place, and so I think it's a real opportunity for us to really elevate and spotlight the Ulster American Folk Park, and with the redevelopment project, and we have Minister Lyons announced when he was in Washington the money to do the development for that, to unlock the capital funds in the Mid-South West Growth Deal. I think we'll have a lot to talk about next year, and we really want to play our part in that group. We are part of supporting the two, but that's from our perspective where I think we have a real opportunity for the Ulster American Folk Park.
Thank you very much. Looking forward to it.
Thanks.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Morris.
Chair.
What is it?
Thank you, all very welcome. And thank you for your presentation as well too. Nearly all the questions have been asked.
That's good.
I still come in again and say harrow some of the ground that's already been ploughed in a sense nearly. The Ulster American Folk Park, and that's within my constituency. I live very close to it, and I'm old enough to remember 1967, I think it must have been roughly about that time, whenever it was being developed.
76.
Sorry?
1976.
It's his 50th birthday next year.
Well,
I should have said that as well.
I think it's in 67, 68, they had the people from America coming over here, and they were all talking about it at that time, about the launching of the Ulster American Folk Park. I've been there on a number of different locations, and again too, as I say, I think you've really covered the ground about how it is that you go to address, say, the development within it now and this additional funding and that you have received there. One question I had in relation to that, just that I would assume that whenever we have visitors from abroad coming to Ireland, it's usually part of the itinerary. But to what extent, we'll say, does it also attract local people?
Do you want to say something?
Yeah, it's the proportion of that local people would make up about 55% of the annual numbers, and people out of state, tourist visitors, would make up 45%. Obviously, with the North American theme, there's a very strong demand there for people visiting from North America, from US, from Canada to come visit. But there's also a range of different, people from Britain, people from France, Germany. It's quite popular with tourists. It's actually our best performing museum proportionally in terms of tourist visitors, and as part of this investment programme, we want to increase that even further. That's the way it's positioned in the Mid-South West Region Deal, as a key tourism hub for the Mid-South West area. So everything that we do will be looking at how do we improve its status in that regard, and how do we increase even further?
The reason I asked the question is that I'm aware of people who say locally that you would ask them, have you ever been to Ulster American Folk Park? And they say no. And I'd be surprised at that, really, and I'd be disappointed as well too, because I think it's a really enjoyable experience when everyone does go there. The other question that I hope to ask as well was that in relation to language, and I have a particular interest there, how do you present that in terms of language here, we'll say the indigenous languages, we'll say, of this country?
Well, it's a key priority for us, and I think we've made some progress in recent years. But it's going to be an area that we see there's a lot of scope for further development as we look ahead. We hold a really valuable archive, a remarkable archive here at the Ulster Folk Museum, which brings together it's not just in a sense kind of Irish and Ulster Scots, but also kind of what used to be termed Hiberno English, which, so in that sense it's not we don't see it as a binary, it's actually more of a tripod in a way, because dialect is often kind of sometimes overlooked, but actually it's how we speak English here is very distinctive, and it's actually infused with Irish and Ulster Scots words, and often that's actually one of the best routes for people to understand Ulster Scots and Irish. And we have a remarkable sound archive. We have a remarkable kind of, as I say, kind of archive that relates to kind of dialect, and within that you can see there's important holdings in terms of Irish, there's important holdings in terms of Ulster Scots, and with the most visible manifestation of that thus far would be the two trails that we've developed, which draw directly, sort of in a sense. So the Irish language trail very much uses the buildings in the Folk Museum as a way of actually introducing almost like the history of the Irish language, and I think it's very strong. The Ulster Scots trail is focused on the archive associated with Robert Huddleston, the Bard of Monterey, who's kind of our local bard in a sense. But languages and identity, like when we talk about identity as one of our key impact areas, language is obviously going to be a key part of that. So it's an area where we see there's much room for kind of further development and growth over the next 5 years, and we feel that we have the assets really and the resources to make a very distinctive contribution. Before the Good Friday Agreement, and it was actually the Folk Museum was really the hub for language activity and research. Now it's Force Gaelic and kind of, you might say, Ulster Scots Agency, but actually this museum here in particular was very much the kind of the focus and the hub for work around language, and we want to in some ways re-establish it, given it does have a very good pedigree in that regard.
In fact, just the term that you used there about the Hiberno English, which describes how it is that we speak English, in a sense, it's really like a fourth language in that sense, but that again too is a great platform for the development of tolerance within peoples themselves, and embracing all languages as a way of communicating and so on. So I'm glad to hear that.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think that is a fascinating. I've been a frequent visitor to the folk park, and that has often been over the bluegrass. I'd be interested in the music, but it is fascinating to see the cross dissemination and seeding of language and music and culture and ideas, and very rich tapestry and a very rich connection between us and the US and us and many other regions as a result of all that. And it is great work that's ongoing there. Just a question occurred to me on the back of Melissa's first question. Do you have any concern, or have you seen any impact in relation to the electronic travel authorisation issue since that was brought in terms of your international visitors coming to your museums?
I don't think we haven't seen it yet. It's probably a little early for our data to have captured that, but we work very closely with we're a member of the Northern Ireland Tourism Alliance, and we work very closely with our other attraction partners, so it's something we'll be monitoring.
Okay. So do I detect a bit of concern in relation to it?
I think the tourism sector more broadly would be concerned about the impact that it's going to have, and our concern wouldn't be any less. We're trying to grow our international visitors. I think probably proportionately we have great opportunity. It's we would call it our low-hanging fruit. So we want to monitor it because we want to, like all of our tourism partners, understand what impact it's going to have for us.
Yeah. Okay, well listen, thank you. That's all very, very interesting and great work. And I have to say, I was intrigued by the description you gave about, you know, putting artefacts out into communities and out into areas. And I will maybe come back to you separately. I'm involved in a local community group, but we also are responsible for a very old, our community centre's in a very old house. It's probably well over 150 years old, and we do have artefacts and we have a history and a kind of a, so it may be that there's particular parts of the collection that would be really good to get out there. So I'll come back to you separately on that. But
no problem.
It's a very I think it's great to open it out and get it, and I sense a very strong sense of that, and that's very welcome, I have to say. And I appreciate the briefing today, and thank you very much for.
Good, and we look forward to seeing you after you've finished across at the entrance to the Folk Museum, and we'll give you a quick tour.
Great. Thank you, Kathryn, William, and Aaron.
Nice.
Thank you very
much.
Keep up the good work. Thank you. Okay, members, thank you. Any other follow-up there, members, or anything else members want to flag? No? Okay,
Just I think we're very lucky to have such incredible resources and to have such different approaches on each site. As someone who regularly takes kids for a day out to entertain them in various places, I think we are very, very fortunate to have what we have on our doorstep.
Yeah, no, it's a really good resource, an important resource.
And often, Shannon, anything you have on your doorstep, you overlook.
Indeed.
How often do you go to the Chance Causeway?
Oh, quite often. How often I go to Portrush? Once or twice.
And the same Navan Fort, like it took a while before I went. I'd been to the museum in Belfast and here, but Navan's right on my doorstep. But you do tend to overlook the things right in front of you.
That's exactly how it is with Ulster American Folk Park, and that many of the people locally haven't been to it. Yeah, that's amazing.
And don't realise the jewel and the gem that it is.
Oh, it's incredible.
Yeah.
But I was impressed by how the museums very much all the coordination role that they're involved in, and working with the different museums, and just the thought behind their answers. You know, even contentious issues. You know that. How they're working with others in the partnership working. So
I spent a wee while listening to William talk during I came up to visit them here to understand a bit more about them a wee while ago, and I could listen to him talk about the passion for the curation of the exhibitions all day, in terms of his passion for it, but his passion for doing it sensitively and in conjunction and in partnership with communities. Incredible work.
Yeah, no, you got that strong sense of that indeed. Okay, thanks members. We'll move on then to agenda item 8, which is a departmental briefing on benefit fraud and error. So the papers will be contained in your pack there at page 357. And I'd now like to welcome the following officials from the department to the meeting. So we have Julie Nelson, who is Acting Director, Debt Management, Benefit Security, Child Maintenance and Make the Call wraparound. We also have Cherrie Arnold. Cherrie is the Director of Finance. Cherrie, you're very welcome back. And Brian Hanna, who is Head of Fraud and Compliance Operations. So Julie, I think it is yourself, am I correct, is going to make an opening statement briefly, and then we'll get to members' questions.
Okay, thank you. We'd like to thank you for the opportunity to come today and chat to you about fraud and error in the benefit system. So the department takes fraud and error very seriously and has a robust strategy in place. We carry out a range of activities, from targeted interventions to criminal investigations and the instigation of legal proceedings in any cases where it's appropriate to do so. In his statement to the Assembly on the 11th of February 2025, Minister Lyons displayed his commitment to addressing fraud and announced a zero tolerance to fraud within the benefit system. There's a range of counter-fraud and error activity in place within the department, including fraud investigations for more serious cases, including potential organised fraud, and these can result in a prosecution through the courts. Compliance interviews carried out on lower level fraud cases, and intervention telephone calls designed to nudge the claimant to declare their true circumstances. There's also some universal credit reviews carried out, and that is a review to ensure that benefit payment is correct, and this can result in underpayments being discovered or overpayments. There's also a programme in place to address official error, including dedicated and risk-based scan checking regimes, and feedback mechanisms are in place then to aid continuous learning. In order to estimate the levels of fraud and error in the benefit system, the Department conducts an annual measurement programme, which includes a full case check on a random selection of benefit cases. Evidence is obtained to verify the information declared by the claimant, and that is verified to confirm that the claim circumstances accurately reflect the benefit award in payment. The outcomes from that measurement programme then are passed to the Department statisticians, who extrapolate those results against the full benefit caseload to produce a set of estimates for fraud and error. And this means that all the figures produced and in your pack are estimates, and this is in line with the Department for Work and Pensions. The estimates are published in the Department's annual report and accounts and are audited by the Northern Ireland Audit Office. So all the figures today refer to the 2023, the latest published figures. For 2023, the estimate level of customer fraud and error combined is 2.9%, which is 240.3 million in monetary terms, and that is out of a total benefit expenditure of 8.4 billion. And this was an increase from 2.3% in 2022. And breaking that down, the 2.9% is made up of customer fraud of 2%, 163.2 million, and customer error of 0.6%, 50.8 million, and official error overpayments of 0.3%, which is 26.3 million. So in total, underpayments for 2023 are estimated at 0.7% for customer error and 0.4% for official error, a total of 1.1% of expenditure. Overall, then, including the overpayment and underpayments of benefit, official error accuracy for the Department is 99.3%, and that is a strong record that has been maintained over the last couple of years. The figures for 2024 will be available in the Department's annual report and accounts, which are due to be published in the summer of 2025. The benefit fraud and error debt strategy from 2024 to 2027 sets out at a high level the Department's strategic aims to address fraud and error, and that is underpinned by a lower level action plan detailing actions over that 3-year period. Following announcements by the UK Chancellor in recent budget statements, the Department for Work and Pensions have received additional funding to increase investment in counter fraud and error activities. And despite budget bids for parity funding, equivalent to the work being progressed by the Department for Work and Pensions, no additional funding has been secured by the Department for 25-26 or in the previous 2 financial years. This additional funding, if secured, would deliver a considerable return on investment, estimated to be 8-to-1 return. The Department's constrained financial position is presently impacting on the capacity to drive down levels of fraud and error across benefits. The Task and Finish Group announced in Minister Lyon's statement to the Assembly on the 11th of February 25, welfare system tackling fraud and error has been established and is due to produce a report to Minister Lyons by the 30th of June 25. The publicising of benefit fraud sentencing outcomes was reintroduced from the 1st of April 2025, and the Department sought advice from Departmental Solicitor's Office and the Department's Data Protection Officer to ensure that the decision to publicise the details of those convicted of benefit fraud in the courts did not infringe on the human rights of the convicted person or contravene any data protection. This approach to publicise the outcomes from the sentencing is the same as the approach taken by other departments. I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you, Julie. So just then, the figures that you have cited there, does that indicate that when we talk about fraud and error, fraud is essentially 2/3 of it, and error is 1/3?
Yes, so the 2023 estimates are 2.9% and the fraud is 2% of that 2.9%, yes, so it makes up the majority of that.
So the statement that the Minister made focused largely at that point in time on fraud, and I know we have dealt previously here with errors and overpayment around carers and payment and that. So can you tell us what is being done in terms of the error? And I do note in particular that universal credit seems to have a higher prevalence of fraud. Is it a potential that because that's a new system and people are being transferred in, that there's actually a greater level of error within universal credit than other areas. Are you able to strip that figure out?
So in terms of universal credit, so the 2.9% that I quoted is across all benefits that we measure. So that's also Social Security benefits. In terms of universal credit, then within that figure, I can tell you that universal credit for 2023 customer fraud was estimated at 9.9%, customer error overpayments at 1.1%, and official error overpayments at 1.1%. So it is true to say that universal credit does have a big influence on that overall global figure, and the reason for that is that universal credit is the second highest in expenditure at £1.2 billion out of the 8.4 billion. So it does have any increase in the universal credit fraud and error then has a big influence on that overall global figure across all benefits. So.
Okay. Thank you. And your briefing note says that the department receives roughly 10,000 allegations of fraud every year. Has that figure grown over the years, and how does that figure compare to other jurisdictions?
So in terms of the growth of the figure, not really. It has been fairly static over the past number of years. Of that 10,000, 75% of those come from members of the public, and then the remaining 25 would come from staff members or other departments. In relation to those 10,000, not all of those would be progressed. About 23% of those are closed because the benefit isn't impacted at all by the allegation, or there's no benefit in payment, or there's already an investigation ongoing. In terms of other departments, I don't have the figures for the Department for Work and Pensions, for example, but I know that their closure rate would be higher than ours. It would be in the 30% figure. So we do, off what we receive, we take forward more cases by only closing the 23%. On saying that, it could just be that we get better quality referrals received than the Department for Work and Pensions, but I can come back on the figures for other jurisdictions if that's acceptable.
Yeah, I think it'd be useful indeed. Okay, well, I think more or less final one from me before I go to members then is around the return of naming and shaming benefit fraud, and that was announced in the Minister's statement. What is the hard evidence that actually impacts on levels of fraud?
So in terms of hard evidence, it acts as a deterrent really, rather than there's hard evidence to support it. You know, it's just one of a number of tools that we have in place to tackle fraud. So the publicising is in line with other departments and what they do, but it is to act as a deterrent in terms of anybody thinking of committing benefit fraud, that we will publicise the details on our department website for 30 days, and that is entirely commensurate with other departments.
Yeah. Well, and frankly, I don't know how you can be so sure it is a deterrent if there is no hard evidence. And it is true to say that they are already published as a result of court proceedings, is my understanding. Is there a concern that this could impact on very vulnerable people who don't have the resources, or there could be other issues there? How are you ensuring that policy is not having a very detrimental impact on some of the most vulnerable?
So in terms of the vulnerable, all our staff are trained to recognise vulnerability within claimants, but before we will proceed with a case for prosecution, we have to satisfy two tests, the evidential test and the public interest test. And if someone is vulnerable, Brian will come in on this, but if someone is vulnerable, then we would not proceed with prosecution, because that would not be in the public interest if we are aware of a condition that would fall into.
I think it would be fair to say also the Public Prosecution Services would take the same attitude and would recommend that it wouldn't be progressed to court if the individual is vulnerable.
Okay, so I'm going to go to members then, coming to Brian. Go ahead, Brian.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you for your very helpful paper. I think it's a good summary, and your presentation today. Certainly, on that last issue, your paper says there was 10,000 allegations of fraud per year, but 47 cases resulted in a prosecution in 24-25. So I think that's less than 0.5%. doing my maths quickly. So the vast majority of cases are dealt with otherwise, but I do think, where there is error, obviously that needs to be corrected, and you've outlined how those checks are happening. But where there's willful fraud, absolutely there should be zero tolerance, and the Minister is quite right to state that, and none of us as elected representatives should in any way condone willful fraud of the benefit system, which is there to protect those who are vulnerable and entitled to those benefits, and that should not be abused. Chair's already raised about the higher incidence in universal credit, which I was concerned about. At paragraph 14 in your report, it seems that we are behind the curve in terms of tackling fraud. It says there in paragraph 14, the Department for Work and Pensions has invested heavily in counter fraud and error activity to address increasing levels of fraud and error in the last few years. Despite budget bids, the equivalent Barnett consequential funding to the Northern Ireland Block grant has not been allocated to the department. So in the block grant we are receiving the consequential of extra funding going to tackle fraud in GB, but that's not been allocated to that purpose here in Northern Ireland. So that obviously is hampering the ability to tackle fraud, but those bids are going in. So I know that's slightly in the political sphere, but can you speak to that as far as you can?
The department has submitted bids for the past 3 financial years. None of those bids have been met. The money has been secured by the executive, not allocated to the department. It does pose a risk that if we're not tackling welfare fraud and error, there could be a financial penalty from Treasury when the money has been allocated to NI to do that work. Minister has recently met with the Finance Minister with regards to picking up in further discussions with Treasury on best of save proposals. As Julie's mentioned already, the money that we invest, we expect we receive it probably in the region of 8-to-1 return. That's evidence-based. If we were able to secure that Fresh Start agreement outlined, there was the potential for Northern Ireland to retain 50% of the savings. So there's significant return that would actually generate more income for the executive to invest in other things. And it's also would also be in line with managing public money to take that direction. Alongside the meeting with the Finance Minister, the Minister has also published a paper or issued a paper to executive colleagues, and in that paper he seeks agreement for 9.1 million for 26-27. Nothing for this current financial year, because if we're going to recruit staff, and that's what the money would be intended to do, to recruit additional staff, up to probably 230 additional staff, for further investment in tackling welfare fraud and aligned with the work that's being done by DWP. He's seeking that for 26-27 because of the lead time to recruit. It would take us a period of time to put new staff in place within the department substantively, and then also to a training requirement.
Yeah. Okay, look, thanks for that. And Chair, I'll be glad to know you've answered my next question effectively, because I was going to refer to paragraph 26 that yes, under 3 Fresh Start and the Invest to Save, there's the opportunity for savings and fraud and error to be retained effectively within the Northern Ireland Block grant. And certainly that is an issue I will continue to ask questions about, because I do feel that's not only is it the right thing to do from the public purse point of view, but we can actually bring more funding for public services in Northern Ireland if we get those negotiations right. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Melissa?
Father Rove, you're very welcome. I was reading through just your presentation, the paper as well too, and the 10,000 allegations and 7,500 of them roughly are coming from the public themselves. It would imply nearly, like as I say, it's not the big brothers watching you, but your neighbours watching you. Is that what the case is there? I often wonder to what extent maybe are these allegations made by members of the public that are unfounded.
So I suppose I think as our opening position on any allegation is that they were there to prove or disprove the allegation. So the initial, as I say, Julie's highlighted the fact that actually the first 25% are not progressed, and that's because individuals are not in benefit or doesn't impact the benefit, etc. So that's the first layer. But then we might go on then to compliance, where we have a robust conversation with the individual, and actually we can identify actually that they are legitimate in their claim and the information is correct, and so again, it's closed. Or in the same with the full investigation, we go in with an open mind that we're there to prove or disprove the allegation.
Yeah.
So it's about, it's getting to the right position.
Yeah. And there was one other line on here, and I struggled just to understand what it actually meant. Let's see just where it's at. In addition to potentially fraudulent cases, intervention telephone calls are carried out. These are high volume nudge calls. What's a nudge call? Designed to encourage benefit customers to declare their true circumstances.
So it's a scripted call that basically takes the customer through their claim that they've put in, and it's just really a conversation to say, well, if your circumstances change, you need to keep us up to date. This is the sort of thing you need to declare. So it's a very gentle conversation around, are your circumstances still the same when you made your claim? And if not, you need to tell us, these are the sort of things you need to tell us about. So.
Okay, that's grand. Thank you.
Cormac, Melissa, agus Tamaj Echo Gadishan.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much for the briefing, really appreciate it. I'm just wondering what systems are in place to detect any kind of potential fraud or issue at the point of application. Is that around where the staff are trained, I suppose, to detect that? And then how does the department use data analytics or that cross-departmental sharing of information to identify potential fraud?
So in terms, I'll take your second question first around the data analytics. So our analytics division within the department will run scans based on previous estimates and the findings from the estimates. So the sort of things that we can see are, historically coming out as errors, and they will run scans in those cases so that we can look at those cases and try and eradicate those sort of errors going forward. We do work closely with the Department for Work and Pensions, and we do receive scans from the Department of Work and Pensions where they have done similar things around high risks, particularly around maybe universal credit, for example, where it's still quite a young benefit and there's still a lot of learning in terms of, how those risks of fraud and error risks are playing out. So we have a lot of interaction with the Department for Work and Pensions, and we take on board, we take their scans as well. We do some work with other departments in relation to, for example, rates and the housing executive, and we actually carry out measurement, but we also do fraud investigations for housing benefit as well. So we do work closely with a lot of other government departments and Department for Work and Pensions in the main. And sorry, can you just repeat your first question again?
I suppose that at that point of application, are there risk factors that are identified that could kind of, I suppose, red flag for potential fraud, and how's that disseminated to staff? So in terms of the application is, the customer or the claimant puts in an application and will be asked, there will be certain verification done automatically, by the systems. For example, in universal credit, there's a direct feed in from the HMRC pay-as-you-earn system, so the earnings will come in at that. But there's also, we have to get the balance right between paying our customers and paying them in a timely fashion. The vast majority of customers are legitimate customers and are not seeking to tell us the incorrect information. So, it's not a case of we verify absolutely everything at the outset, but certainly our staff, we carry out fraud awareness training, and we also have recently introduced a fraud and error ambassador that is going round the frontline offices within Universal Credit. We've started off with Universal Credit because it's the highest risk, but we will seek to roll that out to other branches, just to alert staff to what they can look for, what could be potentially maybe a false document, for example, or potentially just red flags to look out for. But that is a work in progress, that we have a limited resource to do that, and there's a lot of staff to cover. So we are in a programme of visits across all Universal Credit front-end sites at the minute. We're probably about a third of the way through that. Okay, and then I suppose the final question I would have is that line between customer error and fraud, what's the criteria for that? I know obviously there are going to be some very clear-cut cases if you're misrepresenting documentation or things like that, but is there a criteria that a person has to fulfil for it to be deemed as fraud rather than an error?
So in terms, I mean, there is a fine line, but for fraud we have to prove knowledge and we have to prove intent, and we would obviously have to meet the two tests for prosecution, okay, as I explained earlier. But in terms of customer error, you know, the benefit system is complex. Yeah. Customers can make errors, and generally, you know, in a broad sense, if we contact the customer and we ask them a question and they say, oh, you know, I have X amount in my bank account, and we say, oh, but you told us that, you know, and they clearly cooperate with us and, you know, give us the information that we ask, you know, broadly that would be more determined in the customer error space rather than customer fraud. It's the willful and determined,
it's the guilty intent, and obviously for a prosecution then we have to have the threshold of beyond all reasonable doubt, which is a very high threshold.
Okay, and then in the last, in the last 5 years, did you see those prosecutions rising, or is it harder to get a prosecution? What would the state of play be in terms of bringing someone to prosecution?
So I mean, with COVID, obviously we were impacted with COVID. There's for an length of investigation and through the PPS and through to the courts, it's quite a time lag. So there was definitely a drop off because of the impact on COVID, but we're now seeing that rising now. So for example, we would have roughly about 100 cases currently sitting or waiting to go to court with the PPS at the moment.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Sean. Morris.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your presentation. I will be brief. The detection and recovery deterrence, the new task and finish course group is due to present at the end of the month, I think. So, given I think the focus on data retention rules and digital tools, how do you think the recommendations will translate into stronger operational methods for yourselves to recover more debt faster and perhaps a bigger deterrent for fraud?
So in terms of the task and finish group, obviously it's in the you know, working through the stages of the final report and recommendations. So it's not concluded yet. It's to be with Minister by the end of June. So it's too early to say what those final recommendations will be. So we'll just have to wait and see what the report brings on that. But there were a number of objectives, of which digital was one of the specific objectives was in that task and finish group remit.
There's also a significant cost associated with that as well too, and the situation we're in at the minute, we don't simply have the funding to do that. There'll have to be a balance of how the money in the department is allocated is spent.
Do you envisage some of the debt recovery or some of the fraud recovery going towards that new expenditure, perhaps on staff, one offset the other?
If we recover monies from fraud, it's AMI funded, so it actually accrues back to Treasury. We would need to be in the case where we are agreeing with Treasury that we can retain 50% of the funding as outlined in the Fresh Start Agreement. Given the fact that we've demonstrated an 8-to-1 return on the money that we invest, if we're saving or secure that 4 or half of the saving, that would be a significant benefit to both the department and the executive.
Chair, any chance of having even a written brief once that report's known and the findings are disseminated among yourselves and you've come up with a formula? Maybe you could let us know through the chair. Yeah. Even written, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep. So if we'd ask that to be forwarded on, is there any thought being given to if the AMI issue was being discussed and there was an agreement to secure the funding back, that would go into, for example, be ring-fenced for the anti-poverty strategy in order to address wider issues within that?
There's no agreement on what it would be used for. I think it would come down to the executive agreeing that.
Okay.
We've tried from 2018 to get the agreement. There was business case done, there was redraft of the business case done. It did get to OBR, it did get to Treasury, but we've never got the traction on retaining that. So it's positive the Minister's had engagement with the Finance Minister and has taken that forward with executive colleagues.
Okay, thanks, Morris. And so in terms of, I take it, The lowest hanging fruit here of all, you would imagine, is the official error, which we haven't talked about very much. What has happened to address official error? Because presumably that's within your control to eradicate immediately, or to address at least, or take forward. So what's happened in relation to official error? Because I think it's quite a percentage of the error.
So official error is 0.3% off the 2.9%. So it would be the lowest end of, you know, the three components: customer fraud, customer and official error.
What percentages of error?
Sorry?
Yeah, of terms of, so you have fraud and error. What percentage of error is official error?
So of the 2.9%, 0.3% is official error, and that's overpayments, official error overpayments.
But of the 0.9, did you say?
No, of the 2.9, of the 2.9%.
Yes, I understand. But I'm asking about the 0.9, which is error. How much of that's official error? So you had said there was 2.9%.
Oh, yes.
0.9% of that is error.
Yes.
2% is fraud.
Yes.
Of the 0.9%, what percentage of that is official error?
0.3%.
Of the,
yes.
Okay.
So 0.6% is customer error,
okay,
and 0.3% is official error. Yeah.
And in terms of that, what's being done to address that?
So within across the benefit branches, there's quality checking teams in place. So all benefit claims, when they're paid, are subject to a percentage check to check for accuracy. So those teams are in place. There's also dedicated scans that are developed in terms of these official error estimates and what's that showing, what are the main causes of error. So we will run scans on those on cases on that type of case that has that makeup, and we will target those cases to check them and make sure that we are eradicating official error as quickly as we can, and making and if there's an underpaid benefit, obviously repaying that to the customer as quickly as possible.
And do you feel, are you seeing those figures coming down? Do you think that's having an impact?
Well, overall, I mean, in terms of financial accuracy, so that's overpayments of benefit and underpayments, we have a 99.3% accuracy level, which is very strong, and we have had that accuracy level over the last couple of years, so we're not seeing that getting any worse at this stage. So the interventions that we have in place to address official error and to help improve, and there's feedback obviously given to staff for continuous learning to make sure that we are highlighting the errors that are raised and to try and eradicate those at the earliest opportunity. But also we do have a lot of new staff in, and the fact that we have maintained our accuracy record of 99.3% is a really good return, given the turnover and the attrition of staff that we have had and the length of time it takes someone to train in benefits in general, and the complexity of the benefit system.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a wee quick question
go ahead,
back to that? I don't know whether, I can't remember what official had said this to us, but one of the things that they had attributed this official error to was the manual inputting of benefits, because the system is becoming an age that some benefits have to be put in manually. Would you see that as an issue?
Not particularly. The main issues around official error are in relation to income that doesn't come through, for example, from the HMRC pay-as-you-earn system, so self-reported income, self-employed income, those sorts of issues, and maybe to do with housing. There would be some, but a very, very tiny number in relation to manual calculations or system errors, but you're talking small numbers for those.
So a lot of it is actually down to the communication between various departments or stakeholders, really, that all have an input into that overall picture with that?
No, the majority of it would be down to the official who's actioning the claim and how they're interpreting and applying, for example, self-employed earnings, or someone who has self-reported earnings but they're not self-employed. So it would be that that sort of application by the official and what they tell the system, and that's where errors can creep in sometimes.
Okay, a couple of just brief ones from me then. So the figures that were reported are pretty eye-catching, I have to say, where fraudulently claimed over the last number of years went from 99 million to 163 million. However, that corresponds to a total rise in the expenditure on benefits from 6.8 billion to 8.4 billion. So is it potentially then the case that the increasing fraud levels are a canary in the mine for the underlying issue of poverty?
I mean, it could be, you know, it has been reported that there's a general propensity for fraud in society in general. There is an increase in that, so it could be linked to that in relation to, yes, poverty in society, but, you know, we would have no evidence to kind of support that definitively.
Yeah, it's one to keep an eye on, and I think it underlines once again the whole importance of the anti-poverty strategy and getting that out, and we remain hopeful of seeing that or seeing that published. So the final one for me then, we've received recent correspondence in relation to tenancy fraud, and we'll be keen to be kept up to date with developments in relation to that. But I'm wondering today, in terms of your own approach, will there be much commonality between the different policies and approaches to detection? Will those be coordinated, in other words, in terms of tenancy fraud and benefit fraud?
So tenancy fraud will sit under the housing executive, so we would have to take that away and have a look at that and see what their intention is. But we do have close links with the housing executive, and we do have meetings in relation to tenancy fraud, but we can come back on that.
Okay, well listen, thank you. Really appreciate the briefing this morning, and good luck to all of you. And thank you. Thanks for that. All right, members, any further follow-up actions on that, or can we move on? So we've gone then to agenda item 9, which is the forward work programme, and a copy of which is at page 367. Do members have any comments, or are you content to note the forward work programme? Content. Thank you.
Sorry, Chair. Apologies. Do you mind if I just go back?
Yep,
You're asking about
yep.
follow-up actions. Could we write to the Finance Minister and ask for an update on, let me see, paragraph 26. It says Minister Lyons met with the Finance Minister. I'm not sure it was at the previous Finance Minister on the 26th of April. Well, it would have been the current one, I think. 2025, to discuss the inclusion of Invest to Save in future discussions with the Treasury, just on that issue where an element of saving up to 50% could, on fraud, could be retained. So if we could ask the Finance Minister, or whether we want to ask both ministers, but I think it's the Finance Minister in particular is leading on that, on negotiations with Treasury on the potential to put in place that Invest to Save agreement.
Members content?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Would it be worth noting, Chair, can we say that this committee supports that notion in terms of putting our support behind that?
Well, let's maybe get the answer back first, and then we can pick up on what the response is to see, because depending on what he says, it may indicate, that there's a whatever the rationale is. So maybe we'll split it into the two parts, if you're content, Sean.
Okay, but I'd be supportive of that process.
Yeah.
But well,
I would like to see the reasoning before I would take a definitive view like that. So I'd be keen to see.
Yeah. No, there's something to find out more. It just seems it's an opportunity. It's been sitting there since 2015.
Yeah.
And well, there's some small sign of progress being made, but I think it should be taken up.
Okay. Well, members agreed. Then we'll get that process initiated with a letter. Thank you. Okay, members, then agenda item 10 is any other business. Do members have any other business they wish to raise? No, thank you. So date, time and location of the next meeting then is agenda item 11. So just to remind members that we have an informal briefing from the department on universal credit on Tuesday 10th of June, 12:30 to 2 in room 29. You will recall, members, that we received a very informative briefing on the subject in January this year, and this is then the follow-up coming from that, which we would hope will address any outstanding questions or questions that have arose since. Our next meeting then, in formal session, will be at 10 a.m. on Thursday 12th of June 2025. That meeting is taking place in the Senate chamber. That's in Shannon, as we are having two evidence sessions on the sign language bill. So also just to let members know, we'll grab some lunch here, and then we're moving over to the museum for a tour. So if members take the opportunity of that. I would like to thank the Cultra here and the museum, National Museums, for having us here today and facilitating us in what is a lovely venue, I have to say. I also want to thank the Assembly and committee staff for all of the work they have done, and I think sometimes when you come out to a visit like this, it underlines all of the work that goes on in the Assembly on a routine basis that we never see, but there's a significant amount of work involved for all of the staff, from ushers to all of the back room team here and communications and all of that. So I want to thank our own committee staff and the wider Assembly staff for facilitating these visits. Okay, members, so the meeting is now adjourned. I'll just wait for confirmation from committee that